Now, if you've ever used Roundup or have used Roundup, you'd better listen carefully. There's been a major development on the safety front around the use of glyphosate in products like Roundup. Now, this breaking development on glyphosate is huge, and for some reason, it hasn't been widely reported by the mainstream media here in Australia. But here's what happened. A key scientific paper used around the world to defend Roundup safety has been retracted, not revised, not updated, retracted. After it emerged, Monsanto operatives helped ghostwrite it. Now, Monsanto is the company that originally created and marketed Roundup, so their involvement in a study is problematic. It's one of the most powerful agricultural chemical manufacturers in the world. Bayer now owns it. The journal's editors say the paper relied entirely on unpublished Monsanto studies and ignored independent evidence, raising serious concerns. And yet, regulators, including the APVMA here in Australia, have used that very paper for decades to say glyphosate is safe. In 2020, our Ag Minister, David Littleproud, declared the product safe as well. But in 2015, the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified glyphosate as probably carcinogenic, leading the World Health Organization to echo this claim. There have also been more than 100,000 US cancer settlements, bans, and restrictions overseas, and union advisories telling workers to avoid glyphosate completely. Tonight, the Director of Gene Ethics, Bob Phelps, is calling for an urgent public review of glyphosate in Australia, and he joins me now. Bob, welcome to McKnight Tonight.
Hi there, Rob. Good to be here, and thanks for telling the story.
Yeah, thanks for your patience while we finally got to you a bit late. But let's start with the retraction itself. How significant is this, and how heavily did regulators rely on this paper?
Well, it's a little bit too late, really. We've known since at least 2018, when the first case against Monsanto was successfully run in the USA, that the whole thing was a lie. It was in the discovery to run the case before a US jury, which subsequently awarded $289 million to the complainant, that it emerged that, in fact, the Monsanto company and its owner, Bayer, had been running the sort of tobacco industry strategy of denial for decades. The paper was published in 2000. Monsanto wrote it and then got supposedly independent scientists to publish it over their names. So the whole thing was a scam, but as far as Monsanto is concerned, it was par for the course.
What's really concerning here is I've used Roundup. I've used it in my backyard. It is a mainstay in Australian homes. How big a risk do those products pose for workers and the public?
Well, certainly the cases that have gone to trial and that have been successfully litigated in the USA were mostly with people who were regularly using the product. The guy who won, Dwayne Johnson, who got the big award, had been a groundskeeper in a school and was using it every day, basically. So farmers and other land managers, like groundskeepers, people who look after golf courses, would be especially at risk. They're the ones who are getting non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a blood cancer, as a result of their exposure. As far as home use is concerned, it's a product that's much weaker than the commercial product that would be used on a farm or in land management generally. And from that point of view, I suppose it's a bit safer, but it's still a glyphosate.
When you say safer,
herbicide.
Sorry. Okay, I understand what I'm using at home is a diluted version, but when you say safer, is there still a risk?
Oh, certainly there's risk with any chemical, but the Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority will say that if you follow the instructions on the label, then you won't be running an unreasonable risk. And that they
What's a
stand by
reasonable
that
risk?
view, but the problem is that the label says, be careful you don't spray it on adjacent plants because you'll kill them. But it tells you very little about how you should protect yourself. And everybody should wear PEP, protective equipment if they're using that and other agricultural chemicals as well.
I certainly haven't done that. You mentioned the Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority. They continue to dismiss the International Agency for Research on Cancer, probably carcinogenic classification. Why is Australia so resistant to accepting those findings when many other countries have already done so?
This, unfortunately, is about use and also about the lobbyists. So there are two things. Roundup is the most used herbicide in the world, and particularly in Australia, farmers say we can't farm without it. So the lobbyists, CropLife and other organisations that operate globally, come to the regulator and say, look, we've got to have this, and you've got to keep saying no to the evidence that there may be unreasonable harm. And that's what the Pesticide and Veterinary Medicines Authority does consistently. It did a review after the IARC announcement that it was carcinogenic, and they came up saying there are no problems provided you follow the label. The same old story, and yet Roundup was actually on the priority list for review in 1994, and it still isn't banned. So many countries have banned it, but most of the colonial countries like Australia that are real macho and doing broadacre agriculture say we can't farm without it, so we'll just stick to our guns and we'll keep using it.
Well, look, back in 2020, when the manufacturer of Roundup, they agreed to pay almost $16 billion to settle cancer lawsuits in the US. But at the time, Australia's agricultural minister at the time, David Littleproud, he dismissed the concerns about the product, saying, and I want to quote him here, our regulations and our regulatory reform has been as robust as anyone else in the world. I'm confident that if Australians continue to use it as per the label, it is perfectly safe. Is that his get out of jail free when he says if you use it as per the label? Because I feel like he needs to be held accountable for those comments.
Well, Littleproud's still there, but the lobbying and the consensus around agrochemicals is still rolling on, even though there was a report 2 years ago that said the regulator is the captive of the agrochemical industry. They said because the regulator is paid by the people that it's supposed to regulate, it is compromised.
Well, that's as bad as self-regulation because you're in the pocket of those people you're trying to oversee.
Yes, well, its budget's around $50 million a year, and that's paid by levies, fees, and charges on the sale of agrochemicals, and the industry pays. But the industry's turnover is around $6 billion, so it's a very small amount of money. And our argument is that those monies should go into consolidated revenue in government, into the Treasury, and that the regulator should be paid from that pool of money within the taxpayer funds, so that the regulator is distanced from the people that it's supposed to be regulating. And of course, you mentioned in the beginning that there wasn't much coverage of this particular issue here, and that again is the chemical companies muscling the mainstream media and saying, you get our advertising dollars, and if you mention this, we'll be thinking about taking our dollars somewhere else. So
I am surprised it's not in the top of the 6 p.m. news tonight. I've got to be honest, I cannot believe it has not been covered. But look, a major part of this story is the reliance on unpublished Monsanto studies. In your view, should any regulator accept industry data that can't be independently scrutinized? I'm going to guess your firm answer is going to be no.
Well, unfortunately, our regulators are in the pocket of whoever they regulate. Take Food Standards Australia, New Zealand, for example. They take no notice of the fact that the junk food industry and the global companies like Nestle and Unilever and Mondelez and others will not let it review ultra-processed foods, junk foods that are causing public health hazards by their very nature. They're addictive. People are hooked on them. and something like 50% of Australia's food supply, or actually what people consume, is now junk. And that keeps the regulator silent. They should be out there promoting public health and well-being and saying, don't eat this stuff because it's synthetic, it's produced by all sorts of industrial means, it's not nutritious, it's not good for you. They know perfectly well fresh fruits and vegetables, a little bit of meat, whole grains. These are the things that are going to keep people healthy and safe. And yet the regulators are pretty much silent on those issues these days because they're under pressure from those global industries. And it's the same with the agrochemicals, the food, and most things that we consume. If they're regulated, the regulators do a pretty second-rate job because they're lobbied, they're pressured, and they're also funded by the people that they're supposed to be regulating.
Yeah, look, and there's concerning news for potential victims, isn't there? Because just this week, the Trump administration is backing Bayer in its bid to get the Supreme Court in the US to shield it from liability over cancer claims related to Roundup. That was just on the 3rd of December. What do you make of that development?
Well, it's been going on for some time. Bayer has been in serious financial trouble as a result of making a bad deal when it bought Monsanto for $66 billion. Monsanto had all these liabilities, which it didn't mention. So it's being sued over PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, which were used in a whole lot of situations. So it's being sued about PCBs by schools, local councils, state governments, particularly in the USA. And there
Yeah,
are
but just because it made a bad investment doesn't mean that people shouldn't get their payouts.
Yes, but Bayer's still trying to protect itself. And in fact, in those PCB cases, it is actually losing. And I believe, as you mentioned earlier in this segment, Bayer has had to pay out something of the order of $11 billion to
Yes.
100,000 claimants in order to settle those. But still in the US courts, there are something like 60 to 70,000 cases. And when you've got awards like $289 million for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and the company keeps losing these cases. Occasionally it'll have a win, but most juries are awarding a modest amount for actual impacts and then huge amounts for damage because the company lied. It didn't label its products properly. It didn't tell the people who are using it that there were dangers. And as a result, the awards are huge. So the company's now chosen to go to Trump. It's also pressuring state governments, but it wants to go to the federal court and say, look, the US EPA approved these things, and the US Department of Agriculture also approved them. If they were approved, then why make us responsible for the fact that our product has now harmed people?
Well, there's the old thing that that was approved on the evidence that was presented to the EPA, which was false evidence.
Yes, a lot of it was. But like our regulators are routinely accepting the data that companies give them, and most of it's not peer reviewed, not published, and is not independent.
That's an issue.
It's just that's why we need bans. We need bans on things and not regulations. So when people talk about regulation, they're really putting themselves into the hands of governments that don't give a bugger about the community, but are hooked on the money that they get and the influence that they get from corporations. Corporations run the world, after all.
Yeah.
And our governments are appointed and elected and everything else, despite the show of democracy, to actually do
well, on that, Bob,
corporations.
let me ask you this. They're big companies, they're really powerful. You've been fighting Monsanto and Bayer for years. What's it like being in the line of fire against such powerful organizations?
Well, it has its moments, but it's interesting that when I began in 1988, I was actually invited to go and visit Monsanto in St. Louis, Missouri, which I did at their expense, to be convinced that really they were good guys and that they were their products would be very helpful to agriculture and a great benefit and boon to the world. So
I'm guessing you didn't come away convinced.
I didn't. It made me more convinced that they were up to no good. And well, we've soldiered on since then. Genetics is still going, and occasionally we get a win like this case where finally, and at long last, after years of pressure from scientists and environmental activists and so on, this particular editor has said, look, I've got to retract this paper. And the regulators will probably do nothing about it. That's the sad truth of it. And
well, it's still a start. It's still a start, Bob. And
it's a start.
The work you do is very important. And I appreciate you coming on the show tonight. You know, there's a lot going on that our governments, we always assume our governments are going to protect us. And what we see from things like this, and I go back to the comments by David Littleproud, they don't. They don't always put the community first. You know, there are too many lobbyists, there are too many big, powerful companies, and they pay money. They pay their way for access. So, Bob, keep up the good work. Really appreciate it. Bob Phelps from Gene Ethics, thank you for joining us on McKnight Tonight. Really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Thanks, Rob.
McKnight Tonight. McKnight Tonight. McKnight Tonight. McKnight Tonight.